The absolutely catastrophic red tide situation that we are still suffering through here in the Tampa Bay, St. Pete area is being swept under the rug and squashed and spun by the people in power on both sides, Democrat and Republican, to make you think that this is just a natural occurrence and we don't know what causes the red tide, and that come on down and spend your money on the beach here. There's plenty of pockets of clean water everywhere. Don't mind the dead fish smell and the coughing and the toxic water that you have to swim in. Yes, red tide has been around for a very long time, and we don't know what caused it to evolve into a species a million years ago. That is how they get out of answering the question, what caused the red tide? I don't know. The real question is, what is supercharging the red tide and making it so catastrophic today? The answer is nutrients. The nutrients that we are putting into the water. The nutrients from the Piney phosphate spill, the nutrients from agricultural runoff, sewage, fertilizers, and so on. That is what they don't want you to know, and that is what they are hiding from you. Even the scientists at the Florida Wildlife Research Institute, who are all probably terrified to speak up about this because of fear for their jobs, they will tell you that red tide is supercharged by nitrogen and phosphate. Do you know how concentrated the water from the Piney phosphate disaster was, where 230 million gallons were dumped into the bay intentionally? It was 11 times more concentrated with nitrogen than our worst sewage spill ever recorded. 230 million gallons of it. Do you think that might have had something to do with this supercharged red tide that we are suffering through right now? Anyone who has been halfway paying attention to this catastrophe knows what's going on. The DEP knows it, the FWC knows it, our local and state politicians know it, the phosphate and agricultural industries know it, and you and I know it. Unfortunately, there is a terribly long list of state and local officials and politicians on both Democrat and Republican sides of the spectrum that have made this situation so much worse. Our Democratic mayor of St. Petersburg, Rick Kreisman, gave all sorts of incentives to land developers to come on into St. Pete and build without doing what is necessary to upgrade the sewage infrastructure. Now, every time we have a hard rain, as it tends to do in Florida, the sewer system cannot handle it and we dump raw sewage directly into the bay. Hundreds of millions of gallons worth over his tenure as mayor. Head of the Florida Wildlife Commission, Eric Sutton, leader of the organization that is entrusted by the people of Florida to protect our precious natural resources. On a recent Zoom call to the Chamber of Commerce of St. Petersburg, Eric Sutton said this: "We still don't know what causes the red tide, and we have to squash as much media attention on this as possible and get the message out there that there is still plenty of clean water up and down the beach, because otherwise it's going to be bad for business." You know what's actually bad for business, Eric? When people like you don't do their jobs and allow a supercharged man-made disaster that could be prevented to ravage our entire coastline every couple years. That's what's bad for business. I could keep going down this list forever, but the one with the most power to fix anything is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He ran on fixing the red tide situation back in 2018. Governor DeSantis recently called a red tide press conference where he did a whole lot of congratulating himself and everyone around him on how well they've managed the crisis and how much money they've allocated towards cleanup, without saying a single thing about what actually caused this thing to explode or prevention of the next disaster. When asked if the Piney phosphate plant disaster had anything to do with this is what he said.
Yes, ma'am.
Many believe that the Piney Point discharge has a lot to do with this bad red tide outbreak in Tampa Bay. What's your response?
So I think the scientific consensus is clear. It didn't cause the red tide. The red tide was here. I think the biggest impact on Tampa Bay was Elsa, unfortunately.
This red tide sampling data from NOAA clearly shows a weak red tide bloom approaching from the south, entering Tampa Bay, interacting with the wastewater from Piney Point, and becoming supercharged. The bloom explodes in the presence of extra nutrients from the spill, creating a widespread, man-made, deadly catastrophe inside Tampa Bay and along our beaches over a month before Hurricane Elsa was even a speck on the radar. What kind of political spin is that? If you were in the fishing industry, the boating industry, the hotel industry, or any industry, small business that has to do with clean waterways or the beach, that is a direct slap in the face to all of us. The first step to fixing a problem is first identifying that there is a problem. The governor knows the truth. He's seen the real data. All these other state and local officials know the truth. Now, why do they continue to lie about this? They are either cowards and too cowardly to take on this situation and accept a little bit of responsibility and do the right thing. Or they are corrupt and they're being paid off by some lobbyist or some polluting corporation that's chirping in their ear, telling them, you cannot say this thing, otherwise I'm not going to donate to your campaign anymore. That has to be called out. That's why this is happening, and it has to stop right now. He also said that he was going to put $100 million to shutting down the Piney Point plant. Well, if it's not a problem, why are you shutting it down? Second of all, I heard an estimate that it's going to cost closer to $700 million. And guess who's picking up the bill? You and I, the taxpayers, not the phosphate industry and not the hedge fund that owned the thing. Are you kidding me? I am here to call on everyone. The mayors, the Florida Wildlife Commission, the DEP, and Governor Ron DeSantis and everyone around him to come out and publicly say what we all know already. The humans are supercharging the red tide with the nutrients that we are putting into the water, especially the Piney Point phosphate disaster. If you can admit that, then you can be an important ally in solving this problem on the right side of history. If you cannot admit this, however, and continue to deny and spin this, then you are either a coward or you are corrupt or both, and you are the problem. If there is one thing that I have learned through watching the beaches and waterways and entire regional economy be ravaged by a red tide every few years, it's that fish rot from the head. Remember that when you're at the voting booth.